Tonight we talk about the worst career decisions in human history. Not working in fast food, not serving a Karen at the checkout. No, we're going all the way back to the 1300s, where your entire job was being a full-time death magnet. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you like what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some soft background noise, because we're about to take a slow descent into the most terrifying job in history. Let's set the scene. You're standing in the middle of a narrow cobblestone street somewhere in Europe. The year is 1348. The smell hits you first. It's like hot garbage had a love child with death and left it to ferment in a rain barrel. There are flies, of course, so many flies, the kind that buzz in that judgmental way that lets you know your deodorant gave up around lunchtime. You're wearing layers, not because it's cold, but because someone told you the right kind of robe will stop the black death from seeping into your pores. And you believed them. You're that desperate. And on your face is the mask. You know the one. Long beak. Looks like something that belongs in a horror movie about cursed Venetian carnivals. But here, it's just standard PPE. It's stuffed with herbs, flowers, maybe a hint of desperation. The logic was that pleasant smells would protect you from bad air, which was apparently how people thought disease worked back then. Not germs, not bacteria. Just vibes. Very bad vibes. You're not a doctor the way we think of doctors today. There are no degrees on your wall, mostly because walls were too valuable to waste on framed paper, and also because medieval medicine was like trying to fix a leaking pipe using a dead frog and some prayers. You probably bought your title. Maybe you apprenticed under someone who once saw a wound and lived. Either way, congrats, you're the plague doctor now. Your patient load? Everyone. Your tools? A stick, a notebook, and unearned confidence. Now you might be wondering what exactly your job entails. Simple. Walk into homes that smell like spoiled soup, poke at people covered in black, pus-filled boils, and then write down whether they died today or tomorrow. Occasionally, you'll try to treat someone, which mostly means draining buboes or bleeding them with leeches, because clearly if you're sick, the logical thing is to let out more of what's keeping you alive. And let's not forget the cane, a long wooden stick you use to keep a healthy distance from your patients, or maybe just prod them to see if they're still breathing. It's like playing whack-a-mole but sadder and with more fluids involved. Some doctors used it to lift the edge of clothes without touching anything. Others used it to ward off rats because rats were kind of a thing. Not that anyone blamed them for the plague yet. That's a plot twist for another century. The best part? Nobody liked you. The rich didn't trust you. The poor couldn't afford you. And your chances of surviving the year were lower than a medieval street's hygiene rating. Which is saying something because some of those streets doubled as sewers, dinner tables, and apparently public plague-ridden dog parks. You were the one they called when someone was already halfway into the afterlife and needed help dying with slightly more paperwork. You were also expected to keep records, death tallies, notes, observations. Imagine journaling about how a whole neighbourhood rotted faster than your lunch, and you had to carry that energy home with you, if you even had a home. Most plague doctors were outsiders, hired temporarily, and often kicked out once their job was done, or once their breathing got wheezy. Let's talk about the outfit a bit more because oh boy, was it a look. The robe was usually waxed, to keep bodily fluids from soaking through. Because when you're waist deep in suffering, the last thing you want is someone else's sadness seeping into your socks. Leather gloves, boots, and a hat completed the look. All black, all grim, all drenched in the scent of misplaced confidence. Fashion Week, 1348 edition. The beak, stuffed with rose petals, mint, cloves, and whatever else smelled better than death. It also kept people at a distance, which is a nice bonus. Medieval social distancing, enforced by looking like a villain from a discount opera. Now you might be wondering, were plague doctors effective? And the answer is no. Absolutely not. They were about as effective as using a paper towel to stop a tsunami, but they were symbolic, like candles in a blackout. Useless, but comforting in a way. They gave people hope, or at least the illusion of it, which in medieval times was about as good as medicine ever got. People didn't know the plague came from fleas on rats. They thought it was bad air, or a punishment from God, or that Saturn and Mars had a weird planetary argument. Medical theories included imbalanced humours and you're just cursed, bro. So treatments ranged from sitting in a room filled with crushed emeralds to bathing in vinegar. Which sounds relaxing until you remember the open wounds. But you, as the plague doctor, were the face of help. The long-nosed, leather-covered, vaguely bird-like face. People looked to you for guidance, and you gave it. Usually along the lines of, drink this, bleed that, or have you considered being less alive? The worst part? You were often the first to arrive and the last to leave. When everyone else had locked their doors and prayed behind wooden planks, you were out there, knocking politely, cane in hand, ready to step into another house of horror. And you were probably not even getting paid. Or if you were, it was the kind of pay that arrived 3 months late, and in the form of mouldy bread or a goat that had seen better days. But hey, look on the bright side. At least you had job security. There was always another patient, always another cough, always another chance to find out what plague looks like in someone's armpits. Let that image settle in while you drift off. Imagine the feel of stiff leather, the smell of decaying herbs, the subtle scratch of your cane tapping along a quiet, foggy street, and the knowledge that you, poor, sweet you, are the only person in town dumb or desperate enough to take this job. So you've settled into your new role as a medieval plague doctor. Congrats again. You're now officially the most overqualified undertaker in Europe. But what do you actually carry with you? What glorious, high-tech, cutting-edge tools does a 14th century death handler like yourself rely on? Well, you've got a stick, a notebook, and enough scented herbs to qualify as a walking apothecary/walking fire hazard. Let's start with the big one, your beak. It's roughly the size of a small goose's emotional baggage, and it's stuffed with what people back then considered protection, which is to say a nose bouquet designed to make the constant stench of death slightly more tolerable, while also confusing the fleas into thinking you were a particularly determined flower arrangement. In reality, it did nothing except make you look like a confused birdman wandering through clouds of pestilence, and occasionally scaring children into behaving. So, mixed results. Then there's your cane. Oh yes, the plague doctor's trusty stick. This was multi-purpose. You could use it to poke the infected, prod corpses, gesture dramatically in case you forgot Latin, or simply whack a rat that got too close to your boots. It was the Swiss Army knife of sticks, except it didn't fold, and it definitely wasn't clean. The stick let you do your work without touching anyone, which is great because if you touched anyone, you were basically signing up for the express train to Deathville. You also carried a small notebook, or ledger, which was probably your saddest item. It contained names, symptoms, sometimes last words, all written down in chicken scratch with ink made from who knows what. You'd log details like, patient coughing black stuff, probably won't make it past dinner. Or, house smells like the end of times. Recommend burning it down. These notes were supposed to be helpful to future physicians, but mostly just read like the diary of someone slowly losing faith in humanity and also their immune system. Needles, scalpels, lancets, yes, you had those too, all stored in a charming little leather bag that probably smelled like feet and regret. These tools were for draining buboes, those golf ball-sized swellings full of plague juice. You'd cut them open, let the nastiness drain, maybe apply a poultice made of breadcrumbs and animal fat, and then hope the person didn't die immediately. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Actually, most of the time it didn't. But you always acted like it might. That's what counted. Leeches. Of course you carried leeches. Because why not? Everything was already awful. What's a few blood-sucking worms between friends? Bloodletting was based on the idea that disease was caused by an imbalance in your bodily fluids, or humours. Too much blood? Just remove some. Too much phlegm? Try sweating it out while wrapped in wet hay. Medicine was more like a game of wet roulette. And you were spinning the wheel, blindfolded, half asleep, and covered in someone else's body fluids. But don't forget the amulets. Oh yes, even the science-based plague doctors wore charms. A cross maybe, a bone of a saint, a dried lizard in a pouch. Just in case medicine didn't work, which, spoiler alert, it didn't. You had divine backup. Because when you're knee-deep in rotting corpses and slowly losing your mind, a tiny talisman, shaped like a duck foot, suddenly seems like a brilliant idea. Your belt, not for fashion obviously, carried pouches filled with dried herbs like rosemary, mint, lavender, and maybe some garlic if you were really feeling spicy. Not only were these supposed to cleanse the air, they were your only defence against the relentless odour of decay. And considering there were entire neighbourhoods that smelled like old soup and open graves, you were basically huffing that stuff like your life depended on it, because it sort of did. Now let's talk about your treatment kit. This was a laughable little box of hopes and dreams. Inside you had syrups, powders and dried plants that promised to relieve fever, ease swelling, and balance humours. None of them did, but the labels looked convincing, and that's what mattered. You were basically the medieval version of a shady, online supplement company, except you also poked people with sticks and told them they might survive if they really, really believed in it. And then there was the vinegar. Oh, the vinegar. It was poured into wounds, used as hand wash, gargled, sniffed, poured on the floor, maybe even added to soup. Vinegar was like the coconut oil of the 1300s. You used it for everything, despite the fact that it did nothing except make your eyes sting and your clothes smell like a salad. Let's also not ignore your assistant if you were lucky enough to have one. Usually some poor teenager who lost a bet or owed someone money. Their job was to carry things, light fires, dispose of bodies, and occasionally distract angry mobs. You train them with wisdom like, don't breathe too deeply, and if it starts foaming, back away slowly. Every house you entered was a new level of olfactory hell. Wooden floors soaked with illness, walls sweating with mildew, the occasional goat standing in the corner like it owed someone rent. You learned to breathe shallow, squint your eyes, and try not to touch anything unless it begged you for help. And even then, think twice. Let's not forget the psychological toll. You're seeing entire families collapse like sad dominoes. You're watching children cry over parents who can't respond. And all you can offer is a poke with your stick and some syrup made from beetles and crushed hope. It wears on you. Even under the thickest leather mask, even behind the beak stuffed with herbs, you can still smell the sorrow. It seeps in. You can't show fear, though. That's not allowed. You're the doctor. You're supposed to be the calm, collected voice in the storm of disease. Never mind that your hands are shaking. Your notes are smudged from sweat. And the inside of your mask is now a small ecosystem of your own breath and despair. You're still expected to keep it together while the world unravels, one cough at a time. But hey, at least you have job security. Every morning you wake up, and there's another dozen houses to visit, another street to walk, another plague cart to wave at with mild indifference. No vacations, no weekends, just you, your cane, your mask, and the quiet knowledge that you're the closest thing this town has to hope, which is, frankly, terrifying. As the sun sets over another long day of poking boils and writing down obituaries in advance, you shuffle back to your lodgings, peel off your gear, and sit quietly. Alone, in a room that smells slightly less awful than the outside world. You think about the people you couldn't save, the ones who screamed, the ones who didn't even have the strength for that. And maybe, just maybe, you wonder how you got here. Was it for the money, the fame, the chance to wear a beak mask and look like a mysterious bird-themed superhero? Or were you just one of those poor souls who thought they could help, and now you're stuck playing fetch with death itself? Sleep tight, Doctor. You've earned it. And tomorrow? More of the same. You're back at it again, Plague Doctor. A new day, same misery. The leather's a little stiffer today. The beak smells less like herbs, and more like you forgot a bag of oregano in a compost bin. But you suit up anyway, because the street's already full of coughing, crying, and the occasional dramatic fainting that might just be a guy trying to get out of paying his taxes. Let's walk you into your next patient's home. The door creaks open like it regrets its choices. You step inside. The air is thick. That's the best word for it. Like walking into a hot sponge. It smells like boiled onions, wet wood, and the kind of rot that makes your eyes water before you even see where it's coming from. You try not to breathe too deeply. You've developed a skill, a shallow inhale followed by a hopeful prayer that whatever's floating around doesn't decide to colonize your lungs today. In the corner lies your patient, blanketed in something that may have once been white, but now looks like it's auditioning to be a curtain in a haunted house. They're sweating, shivering, and their eyes have that faraway look. The kind that says, I no longer care if you're a real doctor, just make it stop. Here come the symptoms. Let's talk about those. First, the fever, the kind that makes a person hallucinate their goats are talking to them. Sweating, burning, trembling. Then comes the headache, which feels like the devil himself is practicing percussion inside your skull. Then the muscle aches, joints that seize up, backs that curl like question marks. Some people become so stiff they can't stand, like their body is slowly petrifying. Then, the grand finale, the buboes. These swollen purple-black lumps usually show up in the armpits, groin or neck. Golf ball sized, sometimes bigger. They're filled with the kind of fluid that medieval people didn't have names for, mostly because naming it would mean accepting it exists. And if the swelling wasn't bad enough, these things hurt. Like scream through the floorboards kind of hurt. If the plague had a signature move, this was it. People would get these and know, deep in their soul, they had about 3 to 5 days left on Earth. Not that they'd be productive days. You weren't using those days to read a good book or enjoy a sunset. You'd spend them convulsing, coughing, and slowly dissolving into your own mattress. Now, of course, you, the plague doctor, had to pretend to know what to do. So you'd feel the patient's forehead, look serious, maybe hum thoughtfully. You might nod like, "Ah yes, textbook case," while inside your head you're thinking, "Yup, you're doomed." You'd take your stick, prod a bubo very gently, watch the patient shriek like they'd just been stabbed by a flaming porcupine, and then step back like you totally didn't cause that. And because you're the expert, you'd offer treatment. A poultice made of onions, garlic, and some mashed herbs. Basically a medieval smoothie applied directly to the skin. You might bleed them a little, just to balance the humours. Or offer vinegar to sip, even though the patient couldn't hold down a single drop without vomiting like a haunted fountain. You'd write something down in your little book like condition worsening, prescribed pickled mint poultice and divine intervention, and then you'd move on. But why did people think the plague was happening? Let's wade into the delightful swamp of medieval superstition. There were many theories. One of the more popular ones? Bad air. The miasma theory, that invisible clouds of stink caused illness, which to be fair wasn't completely wrong. The air was awful. But the actual cause, Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas on rats, was still centuries away from being discovered, so people clutched their perfumed bags and hoped for the best. Another theory? God's punishment. Naturally, because when in doubt, blame humanity for existing. People said the plague was divine retribution for sins. Too much gambling. Too many tavern songs. Someone probably made eye contact with a goat in a weird way. Boom, plague. This belief was especially great because it let people feel superior while also doing absolutely nothing useful. You also had the flagellants. These were people who walked from town to town, shirtless, whipping themselves in public to show penance. That's right. Nothing says "please spare me from disease," like violently slapping your own back while chanting in Latin. They thought pain could purify them, and while it certainly ruined their day, it didn't stop the plague. It just made things more dramatic. And then there were the scapegoats. People blamed anything and everything. Foreigners, the rich, the poor. Cats. Yes, cats. Entire communities killed off stray cats thinking they were spreading disease, which is unfortunate because those cats were busy murdering the actual culprits, rats. So the plague doubled down with interest after that smart move. Back to your job. You didn't just treat people, you also had to do house calls. Sometimes the sick couldn't move, so you went to them. Imagine entering a home where the only sign of life is a weak cough and the slow drip of something unmentionable falling from a loft above. You climb a rickety ladder, stick in hand, trying not to breathe. At the top, a man curled up under a thatch blanket, eyes sunken, lips cracked, skin covered in blotches like a failed canvas. You lean close. You smell garlic, sweat, and something metallic. You ask him questions he can barely answer. You offer a sip of vinegar water. He gags. You nod sagely like it was part of the plan. You leave him with some herbs and a whispered prayer. You walk back outside. The sun's out now, but it doesn't feel warm. The street's quieter. Fewer carts. More doors closed. Some homes have chalk markings, indicating infection. Others have straw crosses, or just silence. That kind of silence that's thick, like the air's holding its breath. And somewhere behind you, you hear the bells, death bells, carried by other doctors or volunteers or the doomed themselves. Bells warned people, don't get close, don't touch. Someone inside is already halfway across the river Styx. You're numb to it now. The bells, the cries, the wet coughs that sound like someone gargling tar. You make another note in your book. Visited 7 homes, 1 dead, 3 dying, 2 suspiciously quiet. 1 chicken attacked me. You move on, your boots squelch through mud, and something else you'd rather not identify. You adjust your mask, your herbs shifting in the beak. You don't even notice the smell anymore. You've adapted, like a very sad, very tired, very bird-themed lizard. You hear a whisper from behind a door, someone calling your title like it's magic. Doctor. It's not really a question, more like a final hope. You turn, knock, enter, and do it all over again, because that's what you do now. You wander from sickness to sickness, like a very dedicated ghost in training. And somehow against all odds, people trust you. Maybe it's the mask, maybe it's the robes, maybe it's because you're the only one crazy enough to still knock on doors. But hey, at least you're not the rat catcher. Yet. So here you are, a few months into your noble career as the walking incense burner of death. Your robes are stiffer than ambition, your mask now permanently smells like rosemary mixed with tears, and your notebook reads less like medical observations and more like the diary of someone quietly unravelling inside a leather suit. You've seen things, horrible things, things that can't be unseen, especially the guy who tried to treat his buboes with hot cheese and bee stings. Yes, that actually happened. He died, of course, but not before smelling like a charcuterie board on fire. Let's talk about how people saw you, the plague doctor. From a distance, you looked terrifying. This weird bird-shaped figure waddling down the street, wrapped in black like Death's apprentice. Kids screamed, women crossed themselves, and grown men suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to be. You weren't exactly the kind of guy you invited to a dinner party, unless that dinner party already had an open casket centerpiece. But despite the fear, you were respected. Kind of. In the same way people respect an executioner, from a healthy distance, preferably behind a locked door. Some towns hired you out of desperation. Others avoided you entirely, believing the doctor himself brought death just by showing up. Which, to be fair, wasn't completely wrong. You were a walking contamination zone. A leather-wrapped reminder that everything was falling apart, and the best medical science had to offer was poking people with a stick and stuffing your face with flowers. And then there were your success rates. Let's be brutally honest. They were not great. Most of your patients died. Some of them got marginally better, but probably just because their body decided to fight back out of sheer spite. You weren't so much curing people as you were babysitting them through the final stages of collapse, all while pretending you knew what you were doing. You were part doctor, part therapist, part ceremonial undertaker, and part perfume sampler. If you managed to save anyone, it was usually because they didn't actually have the plague and just ate something suspicious. Still, your reputation grew, sort of. Over time, the plague doctor became a symbol. That mask, ridiculous as it was, became iconic. It meant help, or at least the illusion of it. It meant someone was still out there, still knocking on doors, still showing up when even the priests had fled. That's something. You were the final flicker of hope in a world going dark. Now let's talk about your death, because chances are you didn't retire from this job. You didn't get a gold watch and a hearty well done from the mayor. More likely you started coughing one day and tried to tell yourself it was just the herbs tickling your throat. Then came the fever. You knew the signs. You'd written them in your notebook hundreds of times. Now you were writing them from the inside out. And when you died, well, that was complicated. Some doctors were buried quickly, without ceremony. Others had grand funerals paid for by grateful towns, though it's worth noting those towns usually went bankrupt the following year. Your gear was either burned or passed on to the next brave fool, desperate enough to don the beak. But your legend lived on. The plague doctor became a fixture in history, a symbol of grim determination, wrapped in questionable science and even worse fashion. Centuries later, people still recognise that mask. They wear it to Halloween parties. It shows up in horror films. Ironically, it's now cool to look like one of history's most ineffective professionals. Imagine if people started dressing like 90s IT support guys for cosplay. Same vibe. Let's reflect for a moment on what you really were. A product of your time, trying to do good with what little you had. No knowledge of bacteria, no access to clean water, no modern medicine, no gloves that fit right, No idea if today's lunch was going to give you food poisoning or just mild regret. And yet you got up, every day, walked the streets, took notes, poked pustules, lied gently to the dying, and did your best. You didn't have training or a salary that made any of this worth it, but you had duty, or maybe just very poor decision-making skills. Either way, you showed up. That counts for something. You weren't just a plague doctor. You were a symbol of humanity's stubbornness, our endless hope in the face of overwhelming odds, our bizarre willingness to keep fighting disease with sticks and dreams until someone finally invents antibiotics. So tonight, as you lay in your fictional bed made of straw and poorly tanned leather, take comfort in this. You were terrible at your job, yes, but you were also necessary, and that's a rare thing in history, to be both completely ineffective and wildly essential. Now take a deep breath, through your beak, of course. Let the scent of dried lavender and roasted failure fill your lungs. Close your eyes. Imagine the soft sound of distant coughing, the clop of horse hooves, the gentle jingle of a death bell in the wind. You've made it through the plague doctor arc. You've poked the sick, sniffed the herbs, and probably contracted 6 different diseases just from walking down the street. Congratulations, but don't worry, we're not done. Because now, we meet the rat catcher. Oh yes, congratulations viewer. You've officially graduated from medieval bird suit misery and are now ready for the next historical sleep ruiner, the rat catcher. Because if the plague doctor was the guy who showed up after the disaster, the rat catcher was the poor soul crawling through it, face first, nose deep, and probably covered in things that hiss when touched. Let's set the scene again. You're waking up in the same damp medieval village, but this time you're not wearing waxed leather or a ceremonial bird beak. Nope, you're wearing whatever hasn't been chewed through by vermin. Your boots are falling apart. You smell like wet hay, dried blood and ambition. The kind of ambition that says, I'm willing to get bit for a living. You're a rat catcher. That's your job. You catch rats, or trap them, or bludgeon them with whatever you have nearby. That includes clubs, rocks, boots, and sometimes a cat. But only if it was cooperative. Spoiler, cats were rarely cooperative. Now let's be clear. Nobody becomes a rat catcher because they're passionate about vermin. This isn't a dream job. There's no 5-year plan. You didn't tell your medieval guidance counsellor you wanted to chase disease through filth. But someone had to do it. And lucky you, your town decided that someone was you. Maybe you're good at crawling into tight spaces. Maybe you just don't flinch when things squeak in the dark. Or maybe, just maybe, everyone else was smart enough to run when they saw the first tail slither under a door. Your job is dirty, dangerous and unappreciated, and yet strangely essential. You were like medieval pest control, but without the van, the gloves or the basic human dignity. People needed you, but they also didn't want to sit next to you at the tavern. You were the walking reminder that the walls weren't just creaky, they were alive. So what did a day in your life look like? You wake up early, before the sun, before the rats are even done partying. You grab your tools, which are, let's be honest, mostly just sharp sticks and a sack with holes in it. You walk down narrow alleys, crawl into cellars that smell like defeat. You follow the sound of scratching. You listen for the faint, rhythmic gnawing of rodent teeth. You are the rat whisperer. Except there's no whispering, just cursing and yelling, and occasionally screaming when one jumps out at your face. Rats weren't just a nuisance, they were everywhere. In the walls, under the floors, inside food stores, inside people's beds, and worse, people just sort of accepted it. A few rats, normal, a dozen rats, mild inconvenience, a nest of rats under your dining bench. That's just medieval ambience. Now let's talk about how you caught them. First, there was bait, bread, meat, anything edible, which in medieval Europe could be defined very loosely. You'd place it in traps, metal if you were lucky, wooden if you weren't, and something you cobbled together with a spoon and rage, if you were truly unlucky. You also used dogs. Ratters, they were called. Terriers mostly. Small, vicious, and slightly unhinged. These dogs lived to chase rodents. Their little legs moved like furry lawnmowers, and their barks were pure chaos. If your dog wasn't missing at least one chunk of ear from a rat fight, was it even trying? Some rat catchers trained ferrets. Yes, ferrets. The snake-shaped goblins of the mammal world. They'd slither into holes and flush out rats like very enthusiastic spaghetti. Watching a ferret do its thing was both amazing and slightly terrifying, like watching nature cheat at hide and seek. And of course, some rat catchers just used their hands. Bare hands, calloused, scabbed, slightly gangrenous hands. They'd reach into holes, into walls, into places where no one should ever reach unless they had a strong immune system and a death wish. Because if you thought rat bites were cute little nibbles, think again. These things bit hard, and when they did, they didn't let go. Medieval rats were not cartoon characters. They were angry, panicked disease torpedoes with fur and teeth. Rat bites meant infection, and infections meant fever, swelling, possibly death, and definitely shame. Because there was no noble way to die from rodent dentistry. You got bitten by a rat, and your town's eulogy would be, he meant well, but apparently wasn't fast enough. Now here's where it gets darker. People believed rat catchers were part sorcerer, part scavenger. You had to be clever, fearless, and slightly unhinged. Some believed you spoke to rats, others thought you bred them, just to kill them again, like some unholy entrepreneurial cycle. Whether you were respected or feared depended on the town, and how often you brought in results. Your payment? Not much. A few coins, maybe some bread. The occasional piece of cheese which you didn't eat because it was covered in rat bites and regret. But it kept you alive. Just barely. And when you dropped a sack full of squeaking, writhing, disease-flavoured rodents onto the mayor's doorstep, you got a nod. Maybe even a well done. And then they told you to go burn the bag somewhere far, far away. Let's talk about what the job did to you. Emotionally, physically, spiritually. You developed a permanent crouch. Your knees crackled like a fireplace every time you stood. Your back ached in ways chiropractors can't fix, mostly because chiropractors didn't exist yet, and if they did, they'd probably just bleed you and suggest sleeping on hay. You started dreaming of rats, waking up with phantom squeaks in your ears, scratching sounds that weren't there. Or maybe they were. You stopped trusting your floorboards. Or shadows. Or the soft rustle of straw. Every creak became a rat. Every smell became something rotting. You lived in a world where everything had whiskers and was out to bite you. And yet you kept going. Because without you, the town would drown in fur and filth. You were the last line of defence, the grimy hero in a world of ignorance and disease. People didn't say thank you, but deep down, they knew you mattered. You weren't a plague doctor. You didn't wear a beak or carry herbs. But you fought the same war, just on a smaller, itchier battlefield. So tonight, sleep easy. You've earned it. Put down your sack of horrors. Kick off your boots if they don't fall apart on their own. And let the rats scurry somewhere else for once. Because tomorrow, you're going into the bakery's basement. And trust me, what's down there might make the rats seem polite. Congratulations. You've now been promoted or demoted, depending on your personal goals, to the role of executioner. Yes, you're officially the guy people bring out when diplomacy fails and someone's head needs to go on holiday. Permanently. You're standing in the town square. It's dawn. The air is thick with fog and anticipation. A wooden platform creaks under your boots. The crowd is already gathering, clutching bread, gossip and their children. Because nothing says wholesome family outing like a public dismemberment. You can smell stale beer, unbrushed teeth, and that faint metallic tang that means someone's about to lose something important, and that someone is your responsibility. But let's rewind. How do you even become an executioner? Well, you don't apply. No one grows up thinking, one day I'll swing sharp objects at screaming people for the state. No, this job is given to you, often passed down through family, like a cursed heirloom or a particularly unlucky surname. Sometimes, if you were already a butcher, someone good with knives, animals and emotional detachment, the town would invite you to take up the position, which is medieval code for do this or we'll find a reason to make you your own first client. You're not loved, let's just clear that up. You are not a fan favourite, the townspeople fear you. Children dare each other to knock on your door, grown men cross themselves when you pass. You're like a walking omen with a tool belt full of oops. And while you're technically part of law enforcement, you're also just the last line, the final sentence, the punctuation at the end of someone's tragic, messy story. Let's talk tools. The most famous one is the axe. Big, heavy, and terrifying. Looks impressive when mounted over a fireplace. Less fun when it's coming for your spinal cord. Then there's the sword, which was used in some regions typically for the rich or noble because nothing says elite status like getting your head removed cleanly. Axes were for peasants. Swords were for people with money and titles. Brutality was tiered, apparently. You also had ropes for hangings, firewood and tar for burnings, wheels and hammers for breaking bones, hooks, tongs, chains, things that looked like they belonged in a horror film, but were actually used in front of crowds who packed lunch to watch. Medieval people didn't have Netflix. They had you. Now you might think your job is straightforward, kill the bad guy. But oh no, there were rules, rituals, etiquette. Some executions required a confession. Others demanded a speech. Sometimes you had to wear special clothes, a hood, a mask, something that said, "I'm here to end lives, not make friends." You were both a performer and an instrument of justice, or what passed for justice when people thought stealing a chicken deserved the same punishment as regicide. Here's the worst part. People expected you to be good at it. Like really good. One clean stroke. No mess, no screaming. No multiple swings. Because if you botched it, if your axe bounced or your sword missed or the rope snapped, the crowd turned fast. Booing, throwing things, maybe even trying to rescue the condemned. You had to be precise, efficient, like a grim chef prepping a very sad entree. You practiced, often, on animals or dummies or unfortunate melons. You'd study anatomy, learn the best angles, the weak points, the way to make a death as clean as possible. You weren't just chopping, you were delivering the final punctuation mark on someone's life. And people noticed if you used a semicolon instead of a full stop. Psychologically, this job did things to you. You didn't sleep well. How could you? Your dreams were reruns of last week's hanging, or that guy whose neck didn't quite snap the first time, or the noblewoman who begged you to let her say goodbye to her child before you lit the pyre. Your hands were steady, but your soul, threadbare, frayed like an old rope just waiting for one more drop of weight. People said executioners were emotionless, cold, monsters, but really they were just people who'd seen too much, who had to tell themselves every day, this is justice, even when it clearly wasn't. You didn't choose who to kill, that was someone else's job. You just did the killing, and tried not to think about it when washing blood off your boots at sunset. You were paid decently, better than a rat catcher. You had a house, often on the edge of town, where the smell wouldn't offend delicate noses. You had tools, status, and a bizarre kind of respect. But you also had isolation. Nobody invited you to weddings. People avoided eye contact. You were the guy who brought death to the market square. No one wanted to sit next to that during dinner. And yet you served a purpose. In a world full of lawlessness, disease, and chaos, you were order's final argument. You made crime feel risky. You made crowds remember who held the power. You were a warning, not just to the condemned, but to everyone watching. So tonight, as you clean your blade and sit in silence, think about the lives you've ended, the justice you've dealt, the mistakes you've made, and wonder just for a moment what it would be like to put the axe down and never pick it up again. But you won't, because someone's always stealing, rebelling, trespassing, or blaspheming. And someone's got to show them what happens next. Sleep tight, executioner. Ah yes, the gong farmer, the unsung hero of hygiene, the connoisseur of castle's darkest corners, the original I hate my life but someone has to do it profession. If you've never heard of this job, congratulations. That means you've lived a blessed life. But tonight, let's take a gentle stroll into the world of the man who shoveled, carried, and practically bathed in medieval poop for a living. Let's set the scene. It's midnight. Why? Because this was a night job. That's right, you weren't even allowed to do this during daylight. Society was so ashamed of your role that they literally banished your work to the shadows. Which is ironic, considering how visible the smell was. You can practically see it hanging in the air. Thick, tangy, textured. The kind of smell that slaps you across the face and calls you boy, whether you like it or not. You arrive at your designated cesspit, usually a hole in the ground beneath a castle, monastery, or very unfortunate tavern. The latrines above have been busy, really busy. And now it's your job to descend, sometimes via ladder, sometimes by crawling. sometimes with a rope around your waist that says, "I do not get paid enough for this." What do you do down there? You scoop, you scrape, you shovel. Using a combination of metal buckets, wooden boards, and sheer emotional detachment, you move human waste from one place to another. It's not glamorous, it's not clean. But it's necessary, because if nobody does this, the entire castle becomes a biohazard zone. And while that's arguably already true, rats in the pantry, mould on the ceiling, plague just vibing in the courtyard, the one thing even medieval lords couldn't ignore was a full cesspit. Because once the poop started flowing out onto the floor, even knights got squeamish. The term gong didn't mean music, by the way. It referred to human waste. And farmer was a polite way of saying you harvested that waste like it was wheat, only instead of grain, it was hot, sticky despair. You'd fill bucket after bucket, haul it out, dump it into carts, then transport it outside city walls where it could be disposed of. In theory, this meant burying it. In practice, it often meant tossing it into rivers or fields and calling it fertiliser. Because what's better than eating vegetables grown in last week's communal? Shame. The smell? Indescribable. But let's try anyway. Imagine rotten eggs soaked in sweat, sprinkled with mouldy cheese, and left to ferment inside a goat's stomach. Then heat that mixture up just enough to make your nose hair regret being born. That's what you smelled like. All the time. You were a walking cautionary tale. Children ran, dogs howled. Even rats raised a tiny protest banner and moved 2 streets over. And don't forget the hazards. You weren't just dealing with poop, you were dealing with gases. Methane, ammonia, fumes that could knock you out cold if you weren't careful. Some gong farmers died, not from disease, but from inhaling too deeply and passing out face first into medieval stew. Others drowned, slipping on a slick step and falling into a pit, so foul that even your soul wanted to crawl out of your body and take a long, cold shower. You wore thick gloves, if you could afford them. Most couldn't. So you used rags, wrapped your hands in cloth, covered your face with whatever you could find. Scarves, herbs, prayers. Didn't matter, nothing stopped the smell. It got into your pores, into your teeth, into your dreams. Dating was hard. Imagine trying to court someone while smelling like a fermented latrine. "Hey there, milady, fancy a walk near the compost pile?" "Oh wait, that's me." You didn't get invited to parties, you didn't get to go to church. You were a social pariah, but one that held society together by preventing everyone from literally drowning in their own filth. And let's be honest, the job was physically brutal. You hauled full buckets for hours. Your arms ached, your back screamed. Your knees gave up sometime around age 28. You lived hard, you died young. And when you passed, people whispered, "Bless him," but they didn't sit too close to your grave just in case the smell lingered. But despite all this, gong farmers were paid well. Surprisingly well, because no one else wanted to do it. And while they wouldn't sit next to you at dinner, the wealthy knew they needed you. You were the quiet janitor of feudalism, the back end of cleanliness, the human barrier between functional society and open sewer disaster movie. Some towns gave you free ale, others gave you housing. Not great housing, mind you, usually a shack near the edge of town downwind from everyone, but it was better than nothing. You were also occasionally protected by law. If someone messed with you, they risked fines or jail. Not because you were beloved, but because no one wanted to clean up after the guy who cleaned up after everyone else. Emotionally, you checked out. You had to. You learnt to disassociate while knee-deep in humanity's worst exports. You developed a 1,000-yard stare, a dry sense of humour. Maybe a pet rat that lived in your boot. You got philosophical, started asking big questions like, why does my life smell like betrayal? And what did I do in a past life to deserve this? You found peace in repetition. Shovel, dump, breathe. Shovel, dump, breathe. You were the lowest of the low, and yet essential. The city needed you. The nobles ignored you. The church probably prayed for your soul from a distance. And the rats? The rats respected you. You shared a territory after all. So tonight, lay back in your cot. Let the scent of fermented injustice lull you to sleep. You've done your duty. You've faced the worst humanity has to offer. And tomorrow, there will be more. Because people always poop, and someone has to deal with it. Sleep tight, champion of the chamber pot. Welcome to the elegant world of the medieval servant. A career where your job description is basically exist to make someone else more comfortable. You're not wielding axes or scrubbing cesspits, but don't get it twisted. This job wasn't cozy. It was just suffering with better furniture nearby. Let's paint the scene. You wake up not in your own bed because your bed is technically just some hay in a corner, but because your lord has rung a TMR passive-aggressive bell that says, "I want porridge and I want it now." It's still dark. The air is cold. Your feet are already numb. There's a good chance you slept next to a broom, a mop, and that one mouse you've named Gerald out of spite and companionship. You pull on your single set of clothes. They're damp. Why? Because everything's damp. You're in a stone castle. There's no insulation. Just the bitter warmth of generational disappointment. Now, as a servant, you don't have one job. You have all the jobs. You light fires, fetch water, make food, clean floors, clean people, wipe things that should not need wiping. You're part butler, part janitor, part personal assistant, and part extremely underpaid emotional support animal. You're like Siri if Siri could bleed and was always on fire. Your boss, a noble. Someone who has never lifted anything heavier than a turkey leg in their life, and once cried because the bathwater wasn't warm enough. Their job is to exist. Your job is to ensure they exist in absolute comfort, even if it means you don't. Let's go through a typical day. First, you stoke the fire in their chamber. Not your fire. You don't get one of those. You warm your hands over the flames meant for someone else's feet. You lay out their clothes, which weigh more than your hopes and dreams combined, and have more embroidery than sense. Then you wake them up gently, if they're nice. Or you get screamed at for being late if they're not. Next, breakfast. You fetch water from a well that's roughly 3 miles away and has the temperature of betrayal. You boil it, stir oats, add honey if your lord's in a good mood. Then you serve it on a plate that costs more than your annual wage. After that, laundry, but not modern laundry, medieval laundry, which means kneeling by a river and slapping clothes against rocks like you're trying to intimidate them into being clean. Soap is rare. Bleach doesn't exist. Your hands are red and raw. Your back aches. And the water smells suspiciously like the gong farmer's morning delivery. Next errands, need bread, you fetch it. Need wine, you carry it. Need a special flower from the top of a hill, because your master heard it helps with digestion? Off you go. Need to ride 20 miles to deliver a note that says, "Coming for dinner"? Saddle up, squire. You are the postal service, the Uber Eats guy, and the family therapist all rolled into one very tired human. Meals are especially fun. You cook the food, lay it out, cut the meat, serve it on silver plates you're not allowed to touch with dirty hands. You get the scraps. Maybe a bone, maybe some gruel. If your lord is generous, a second spoonful of yesterday's bread soup. Delicious. But wait, it's feast day. That means you're helping prepare other people's food too. The nobles are throwing a party. You'll be running back and forth for hours, fetching wine, refilling cups, cleaning spills, keeping the fire going, herding drunk guests, and definitely getting yelled at by someone who thinks you made eye contact too confidently. You'll be lucky to sit down for 10 minutes. You'll be luckier if someone doesn't vomit on your shoes. At night, you help your lord to bed. Yes, that includes changing into their sleeping robe, adjusting their pillows, and sometimes if you've really hit rock bottom, tucking them in while they mumble nonsense about how exhausting their day was. Then you crawl back to your straw pile, every muscle in your body humming with resentment and early-stage arthritis. Now let's talk pay. If you're lucky, you get a few coins per year. That's per year. Most of your payment is food, shelter, and not being executed. You might get a holiday once a year, which you'll use to visit family who also hates their jobs, just a little less than you hate yours. But here's the weird part. This was considered a good job. Being a servant meant you had stability. You were indoors. You were near wealth. You weren't scraping your dinner off the road or chasing rats through ditches. You had proximity to privilege, which in medieval Europe was basically the dream. Emotionally, you had to build up walls, because your life wasn't yours. You existed to serve. Your time, not yours. Your body, loaned out. Your identity, hidden behind the title of boy, girl, servant, or that one who spills things. You learned to smile when insulted, to bow when slapped, to laugh when your master told a joke that wouldn't even make a squirrel chuckle. But you weren't stupid. You knew everything. You heard the secrets, the affairs, the backroom plots, the gambling, the drinking, the occasional murder cover-up. You were the silent observer in a house of chaos. And if you were clever, very clever, you used that information wisely, maybe earned a little more food, a better corner to sleep in, protection, or in rare cases, promotion. Because yes, some servants climbed the ranks, became head stewards, advisors, trusted members of the household. But those were rare. Most stayed where they started, quiet, tired, and carrying someone else's chamber pot at 3 a.m. because the other one's too cold. So tonight, as you collapse onto your straw mat next to the pantry, under the stairs, beside Gerald the mouse, take a deep breath. You've done it. You've survived another day of servitude without screaming into the firewood or kicking someone down the spiral staircase. Sleep well, silent soldier of the domestic front. Tomorrow, you wake up before the sun again. Ah yes, the blacksmith. The medieval equivalent of a human blast furnace with depression. You were strong, you were skilled, and you were constantly one bad day away from fusing your own foot to the floor with molten iron. This was the job everyone respected, but no one actually wanted. Let's begin as always by immersing you in the scene. You wake up to the smell of smoke, sweat, and a very faint note of singed hair, probably yours. The forge never really sleeps. It just sulks overnight and flares back to life the moment you start pumping those bellows. You roll out of bed, which, by the way, is just a sack of straw next to your anvil, and start your day with a full-body groan that echoes off the soot-stained walls like a ghost of medieval back pain. You're already sweating and you haven't even put your apron on yet. That apron? It's leather, heavy, stiff, slightly damp from last night's accidental beer spill, and definitely scented with years of, oops, that was too hot. You grab your hammer, which feels like it weighs slightly more than your regrets, and get to work. Your job? Everything. You make nails, horseshoes, swords, tools, armour, hinges, buckles, ploughs, chains, and occasionally emergency hairpins for nobles who suddenly remember they're late to a banquet. You are the factory, the supply chain, the customer service line, and the warranty all in one, very loud, very sooty package. Let's talk tools. Your hammer is your best friend. You swing it hundreds, sometimes thousands of times per day. Your arms are jacked, your shoulders ache, your hands are so calloused they've started developing their own zip codes. You've got tongs, chisels, files, and things that look like they belong in a dungeon, but are technically for shaping metal. Every tool is handmade, by you, because of course it is. The forge? Oh, she's temperamental. A fire pit fueled by coal, wood, or whatever the local economy hasn't run out of yet. You pump the bellows to feed the flames like you're trying to inflate a hot air balloon made of hate. The heat is intense, not warm, not cosy. This is my eyebrows just crisped heat, the kind of heat that makes you question your life choices and also your water intake. Working with iron isn't like baking bread. You don't get a nice ding when it's done. You heat it until it glows like the surface of Mars and then beat it into shape like it owes you money. Miss a strike? Too bad. Wrong angle? Start over. This isn't Photoshop. You don't get an undo button. You make mistakes in real time with real consequences. And don't forget about your ears. Blacksmithing is loud. Clang after clang, day in, day out, until your hearing becomes less of a sense and more of a vague suggestion. Conversations become guesses. Birds, don't hear them. Church bells? Maybe if you're lucky. Your world is a constant percussion concert, starring you, your hammer, and your inability to escape the echo. Now let's talk burns. You've got them. Everyone knows you've got them. Your arms are a roadmap of every just a little too close moment. That one time the coal flared up. That other time you forgot your tongs were still hot and grabbed them like an optimistic idiot. You've got permanent tan lines from the forge and permanent trauma from trying to quench a blade too fast and accidentally creating a medieval flashbang. But despite the danger, the exhaustion, the full-body marinade of sweat, soot, and sorrow, people respect you. You are essential. The village needs your nails. The knights need your swords. The farmers need your ploughshares. You are the backbone of productivity, the furnace-fed god of necessity. Even nobles who think their bathwater heats itself bow their heads slightly when you walk by. Or at least they pretend not to gag at the smell of molten steel and personal effort. Social life? Minimal. Your hands are stained, your clothes are filthy, and you often look like you just survived an explosion because you probably did. Dating is tough when every romantic gesture is accompanied by sparks, noise, and the faint scent of overcooked hair follicles. Come by the forge later Doesn't exactly scream luxury. And yet you endure. Because it's not just a job, it's an identity. You're strong. You build things, you make tools that last decades, weapons that outlive kings, armour that lets someone walk into battle and walk back out again. You create with fire. Not many people can say that, but it takes a toll. Your joints ache. Your lungs are full of things that shouldn't be in lungs. You cough like a chimney and sleep like a stone. You wake up sore and go to bed sorer, and you wouldn't trade it, because no matter how hot it gets, no matter how much metal you drop on your foot, no matter how many days you go without hearing anything except your own hammer, it's yours. So tonight, rest easy. Lay back on your straw pile, let your burns cool, and listen to the soft ticking of cooling iron. You've bent the world to your will today. You've shaped it, forged it. And tomorrow, you'll do it again. Just maybe don't fall asleep with your boots on. They're still hot from the last horseshoe fitting. Ah yes, the medieval miner. If hell had a labour division, this job would be its unpaid internship. Your role? Spend 12 hours a day in a tunnel that smells like damp socks and existential dread, chipping away at rock in search of silver, coal, salt, or some other mineral that your lord claims will save the economy. Spoiler, it won't. Let's set the mood. You wake up before sunrise. Not that it matters, because you won't see sunlight again until dinner, assuming you don't get crushed by a boulder, gassed into unconsciousness, or fall into a bottomless shaft because someone forgot to install the not dying part of the infrastructure. You pull on your work clothes, which are more holes than fabric, strap on your belt of basic tools, and eat your morning meal, a stale piece of bread that tastes suspiciously like rock dust and sadness. Then you trudge to the mine, passing through a forest of coughing co-workers, all of whom have the same complexion as damp limestone. At the mine entrance, you're greeted by the comforting sound of screaming hinges, groaning supports, and a foreman who's 3 shades grumpier than the coal you're about to inhale. You grab your pickaxe, your torch, if you're lucky, and descend into a tunnel narrower than your career prospects. Let's talk about that tunnel. It's roughly 5 feet high, so you're either crawling, hunched over, or permanently developing the posture of a depressed shrimp. The air is stale. Your torch flickers. The walls drip moisture. And every few minutes there's a loud crack from somewhere nearby that reminds you the earth is constantly trying to kill you. It's basically a group hug from a cave that hates your entire bloodline. Now your job isn't just dig, it's strategically dig. You're working in total guesswork, hacking at rock with tools so crude they make Stone Age axes look ergonomic. You swing your pickaxe again and again and again until your hands are raw and your shoulder feels like it's about to file a formal complaint. When something finally breaks away, it might be a chunk of ore, or it might just be another worthless rock that laughs at your effort and dares you to keep going. You collect it anyway. Because management has no sense of humour and still expects a quota, there's always a quota. Sometimes you use fire setting, heating the rock face with flames, then dousing it in water to make it crack. Sounds cool, right? Except it fills the tunnel with steam, smoke, and the occasional spontaneous cave-in. So not exactly OSHA compliant. And let's not forget about ventilation. Or rather, let's, because ventilation didn't exist. The only fresh air came from shafts above, which were rare, or from someone fanning the tunnel entrance with a piece of sheepskin. Most of the time you're breathing a spicy blend of dust, mould, torch fumes, and other miner's breath. If you're not coughing, you're dead. If you are coughing, you're still probably dead, just slower. Now, the noise. It's a constant rhythm of pickaxes striking stone, wood creaking under pressure, and the occasional scream from a nearby shaft when someone's rope gives out. Every sound echoes. Every echo sounds like something falling. Every fallen thing might be your exit being sealed behind you. But here's the worst part. The silence. When the tools stop, and you hear nothing, not even your own breath, that's when it's time to panic. Because that silence usually means something just shifted. And when the mind shifts, it doesn't politely rearrange itself. It collapses. You don't get a warning, just a brief moment of, huh, before everything turns into a rock-based blender with no off switch. Still, you keep working. Because what else are you going to do? Be a farmer? Those guys lose their teeth to rye mould and get yelled at by geese. You at least get paid, sometimes in coins, sometimes in salt, sometimes in the vague promise of community respect. which is hilarious because nobody in the village actually wants to stand downwind of you. Let's talk about your co-workers. Good people, hard workers, and most of them are missing at least one finger, maybe a toe, maybe an eye. Some are 12 years old, some are 60 and look like they were carved from tree bark and spite. You bond through grunts, shared flasks of whatever isn't flammable, and the mutual understanding that you will never, ever be fully clean again. And hygiene? Forget it. You are blackened from head to toe. Your nails are permanently stained. Your hair feels like old straw. Your nose bleeds randomly. You haven't had a proper bath since the Crusades. And if your clothes catch fire from a wayward torch spark, you don't stop, drop and roll. You just sigh and keep mining, because the flames will probably give up before you do. Let's not forget the animals. Some mines used ponies to haul carts. These poor creatures lived and died underground, eventually going blind from the darkness. You patted them on the nose when you passed, not because you were sentimental, but because they were the only co-workers who didn't cough on you. And through it all, you dug. Because someone had to. The lords wanted silver. The priests wanted gold. The merchants wanted salt. And you? You just wanted to make it out with your bones still inside your body and enough coin to afford bread that wasn't half rock. At the end of the day, you emerged from the mine looking like a soot-drenched ghoul. You'd wipe your face with a cloth, cough up something that shouldn't be in your lungs, and trudge home under a sky that feels unfamiliar. You'd eat, sleep. And then God's help you'd do it again, because that was the job. So tonight, rest those arms, let the ringing in your ears lull you into sleep. Let the phantom smell of iron and sweat fade into the darkness. You've earned a moment of peace, a breath of clean air, and a dream that doesn't involve cave-ins or accidentally mining into a sewer line. Sleep deep, oh dusty digger of despair. Congratulations, you're now a grave digger, the medieval equivalent of a welcome mat for death. Your entire profession revolves around being the last person to interact with someone before they start decomposing. You work rain or shine, plague or no plague, with a shovel, a prayer, and exactly zero chance of emotional stability. Let's ease you in. You wake up, not to an alarm clock, not to a rooster, but to a polite knock at your door followed by, "We've got another one." That's your life. One long chain of another ones. You pull on your cloak, not for warmth, but to hide the fact that your clothes haven't been washed since the last funeral with less than 5 attendees. You grab your tools, a shovel, a lantern, and possibly a bottle of something flammable that tastes like regret and burns like truth. You make your way to the graveyard. The sun isn't up yet. Neither are you, emotionally. The grass is slick with dew. The air smells like soil, fog, and someone's unfinished eulogy. Your workplace? The cemetery. A delightful patch of land filled with silence, sadness, and the occasional deeply unsettling crow. You walk past fresh mounds, old tombstones, and that one tree that everyone swears is haunted. You don't care. You stopped being scared of ghosts around the 50th body. The job is simple. Dig a hole, a deep hole. Not shallow, not symbolic. Deep enough to prevent wolves from snacking and priests from panicking. Usually about 6 feet. Though, let's be honest, measurements were loose back then. Some graves were more like 4 feet and hope. The soil is unforgiving. Clay, rocks, roots, the ground resist you like it's trying to keep the dead. You fight it anyway. Your shovel is worn to a curve. Your hands are blistered. Your back creaks with every lift. You've got dirt under your nails, in your ears, probably behind your eyeballs. You breathe in earth with every motion until your lungs feel like flower pots. And just when you hit your rhythm, here comes the body, wrapped in cloth or wood, or sometimes just laid on a plank like leftovers. You don't flinch, you don't gag. You've seen worse. You've smelled worse. The body's already beginning to turn, skin pale, lips blue. Something leaking that no one talks about. You lower it in with the delicacy of someone who's done this too many times to be nervous, and not enough times to be numb. You might say a few words, or not. That depends on who they were. You remember faces occasionally. The baker's wife, the boy who used to chase rats for coins, the soldier who came back in pieces. You try not to dwell. Too much remembering turns the job into grief. And grief doesn't leave room for efficiency. Then the covering. Shovel after shovel of soil, dropping like heavy rain onto silence. It's rhythmic, soothing, in a macabre sort of way, like tucking the earth back in. When you're done, you pat the mound, adjust the marker. Sometimes it's a carved stone. Sometimes it's just a wooden stake. Sometimes nothing. You take a moment, breathe, wipe your brow, then someone calls your name. Guess what? Another one. During plague times, this job became a horror movie on fast forward. Bodies came faster than you could dig. Pits were filled, then mass graves, then more. There were days when you didn't stop, just dug, buried, marked and moved on. The line between one person and the next blurred. You weren't honouring the dead anymore. You were managing them. You worked nights to keep up. You stacked bodies. You buried entire families. You learned to recognise the sound of a cart full of corpses coming down the road by the way the wheels creaked under the weight. You learned to avoid eye contact with the living, because you'd probably be seeing them again within a week, just quieter. And the respect? Forget it. People feared you, thought you were cursed. You touched the dead after all. You lived among them. You smelled like them. It didn't matter that you were the only one willing to carry a body for miles through mud. The townsfolk crossed the street. Clergy mumbled prayers behind your back. Children whispered stories about how you could see ghosts. You let them. Better to be feared than bothered. You didn't get paid much. A few coppers. Maybe food. A room near the cemetery. Because no one else wanted it. You slept light. Not because of ghosts you wished it was ghosts, but because your dreams were filled with coughing, crying, shovels, dirt. The moment someone's arm slid out from the shroud at the wrong angle, emotionally, you shut it down. Fast. You stopped asking names, stopped wondering about their lives. You became a machine, a quiet, efficient, dirt-covered mechanism for loss. You made peace with death the way a shipwrecked sailor makes peace with the ocean, not by loving it, but by accepting that it was always going to be there. But deep down you knew. You were doing something important, holy even. You gave people a place to rest, a final kindness, a ritual in a world that had lost its grip on grace. You were the last hand that touched them, and sometimes that mattered. So tonight, put down your shovel, wipe the dirt from your arms, sit among the stones, and listen to the breeze rustling the grass over all the people you've helped rest. They don't judge you, they don't fear you, they just sleep. And for a few hours, so can you. Sleep well, gravedigger. Tomorrow's forecast, more digging. Ah yes, the leper caretaker. Because apparently being around the plague wasn't enough, you wanted a more hands-on approach with an incurable disease and a side of public shame. You, my friend, are now the medieval equivalent of a hospice nurse, janitor, therapist, an outcast all rolled into one. Let's set the scene. You live outside the city walls, not by choice but by necessity. Leper colonies were pushed far from town, isolated like someone decided, what if we just built sadness its own village? The buildings are wooden, crumbling, and permanently damp. The paths are muddy. The air smells like herbs, mildew, and the faint sweetness of decaying flesh. Welcome home. You wake up early. Not because you're eager, but because lepers don't clean themselves, feed themselves, or rewrap their own wounds. Most can't. Their nerves are damaged. Their fingers are gone. Their feet are half there. And you? You're the one who has to help them keep going, even though most of society thinks touching them is a one-way ticket to God's recycling bin. You begin by lighting incense. Not for religious reasons, but because this place smells like a meat market that's been abandoned in the rain. Then it's time to make rounds. You carry water, rags, and whatever salves the monastery could spare. You open doors slowly, because you never know what you'll find. Someone crying, someone praying, someone who didn't wake up. Leprosy, now known as Hansen's disease, but back then just called unclean, is a bacterial infection that damages the skin, nerves, and eyes. But medieval people didn't know that. They thought it was divine punishment, a mark of sin, a cosmic post-it note that said this one's broken. So instead of treatment, they offered bells, literal bells. Lepers had to wear them to announce their presence. You didn't get to walk down a street without ringing like a haunted ice cream truck. Your job, as caretaker, was to tend to their wounds, carefully unwrap bandages soaked through with blood and fluid, clean what could be cleaned, Remove what couldn't. You'd hold their hands, or what was left of them while they cried. You'd spoon feed those too weak to eat. You'd read scripture to those too blind to see. And you'd cry later, alone. Because being near this much suffering was like wading through emotional quicksand every single day. And did society thank you for this? Of course not. They feared you too. People thought leprosy could be caught just by being in the same room, or even by looking at someone too long. So even you were treated like a disease. If you walked into town to get supplies, people moved aside like you were dragging death behind you. You weren't paid in coin. You were paid in pity. Sometimes bread, sometimes silence. Occasionally prayer. Never respect. Let's talk logistics. These hospitals, called Lazar houses, were underfunded, overcrowded and barely standing. You had to carry water uphill, cook with what little grain you had, patch roofs, shovel waste, and try to stop fights when someone accused someone else of stealing their bread or trying to convert their foot into a pillow. There were monks sometimes, occasionally nuns, but often it was just you and 30 or 40 people slowly falling apart, physically and emotionally. You learned to recognise cries in the dark. You knew the difference between a scream of pain and a scream of despair. You learned to say comforting words with a mouth that didn't always believe them. Let's not ignore the toll. Your hands were raw from washing. Your feet bled from walking miles to fetch supplies. Your back was permanently hunched from lifting people twice your weight because the last caretaker had mysteriously stopped showing up. You didn't sleep well. The night was filled with coughing, moaning, and the occasional unsettling silence that meant you'd need to dig another grave tomorrow. But you stayed, because if you didn't, who would? You weren't a hero. You were tired. You were overworked. You didn't have a saint complex. You had a no one else would do it complex. The patients? They didn't thank you every day. They were bitter, scared, angry. Sometimes they lashed out. Sometimes they just stared at you like you were the last lifeboat on a very slow sinking ship. And occasionally, just occasionally, someone got better. Not cured, but stronger. They smiled, laughed, told a joke that was actually funny. Those were the moments you clung to, like gold nuggets in a swamp. Sometimes you'd sit outside at night, look up at the stars, and wonder if anyone else on earth was doing a job this bleak. You'd whisper to yourself, maybe to God, maybe to no one. Let them have peace. Not just your patients, but you too. Because you hadn't had a hug in years. Because people avoided your shadow. Because you were more ghost than person. And still every morning you got up, lit the incense, unlocked the door, stepped into the dark with a bucket, a rag, and whatever pieces of hope you hadn't lost yet. So tonight, sleep deeply. You've earned it 10 times over. You've comforted the suffering, even when no one comforted you. You've given dignity where others gave disgust. And if the world turns a little kinder in the future, it'll be because of people like you, the ones who stayed behind holding the hands. Everyone else was too afraid to touch. Sleep well, caretaker of the forgotten. Ah yes, the court jester, the original clown, the living meme of the Middle Ages. You were entertainment, human furniture, political commentary and scapegoat rolled into one jangly-hatted, dead-inside package. People think this job was fun. They imagine singing, dancing, tossing apples in the air while kings chuckle into goblets of wine. Yeah, no, let's unpack the trauma. You wake up in a castle. Sounds fancy, right? Wrong. You sleep in a tiny room next to the servants' quarters, right between the scullery and the room where they store regret. Your mattress is straw. Your pillow is sadness. You pull on your outfit, yes, the one with the bells. Always the bells. You sound like an off-brand reindeer with anxiety. The hat is floppy, stupid, and slightly too tight. Perfect. Your job? Be funny. That's it. Just be hilarious all day, every day for people who think stepping on peasants is comedy gold. You need to juggle, do impressions, tell stories, dance, play instruments, mock the nobility just enough to make them laugh, but not so much that they get offended and have you whipped, exiled, or, in one unfortunate case, launched out of a trebuchet. Yes, really, it's a tightrope walk on a rope made of human ego. When the king is happy, you perform. When the king is sad, you perform harder. When there's a banquet, a funeral, a diplomatic meeting, a war planning session, guess what? You're the entertainment. Nothing helps with mourning like watching a guy fall on his face and pretend it didn't dislocate something. And if you weren't funny, you were done. Some kings were merciful. Most weren't. History has stories of jesters being executed for a bad joke. One guy made a pun that annoyed the queen. Boom, gone. No second chances, no open mic nights. You were quite literally one bad punchline away from unemployment via sword. Your audience? Brutal. You're not performing for a room full of polite chucklers. You're trying to amuse bored royalty, people who already think they're funnier than you because they once made a servant cry. If your jokes weren't cutting edge, timely and flattering to their egos, you'd get pelted with meat bones or forced to clean something you can't talk about on a family-friendly YouTube channel. And yes, there was pressure. Massive pressure. You weren't just some guy with a lute. You were often the only person in the room allowed to say anything true, hidden beneath humour. You'd sneak critiques of politics, scandal, or war plans into jokes. But again, say too much and you're toast. Say too little and you're boring. You had to dance between genius and death like your slippers were made of explosives. Physically, it wasn't a cakewalk either. Acrobatics? Yep, you had to be limber, flexible, perform cartwheels, handstands, and whatever else the king saw at that one Italian fair he won't shut up about. Your knees hurt. Your back is twisted. You once fell off a table during a reenactment of the hilarious goat incident, and haven't walked quite right since. And you didn't eat with the nobles. You sat with the servants, or alone. You were an outsider to everyone. Nobles didn't respect you. Servants didn't trust you. You were part of the elite and not at the same time. It's the medieval equivalent of being the funny guy at a dinner party full of CEOs who think laughter is a lower class emotion. Let's talk outfits. Yes, you wore bells. Yes, you wore tights. But the real tragedy was the colour. Bright. Obnoxious. Designed to make you stand out like a blood stain on a wedding dress. You were a walking cartoon. People didn't just laugh at your jokes, they laughed at your existence. That's the job. Emotionally, you were probably not okay. You laughed outwardly, cried inwardly. You were everyone's source of joy but your own. You didn't have friends, you had an audience. You didn't get to be sad, you had to be on, always. Even when you were sick, even when you were grieving, even when the king was executing someone you liked and wanted a joke to lighten the mood. And what about retirement? There wasn't one. When you got too old to dance, too tired to sing, too broken to joke. They replaced you. Maybe they gave you a handful of coins, maybe they didn't. Some jesters ended up as beggars. Others were thrown into the army as morale boosters. A few lucky ones became advisors because kings eventually realised the jester was often the only person smart enough to tell them the truth. But most? Forgotten. So tonight, as you remove the bells from your ankles and rub your aching knees, let yourself feel something. Not joy, not sadness, just relief. You got through another day without being impaled for telling a limerick about the Duchess's eyebrows. Sleep well, courtful. You danced, you joked, and you lived. Barely. And tomorrow? You better be even funnier. Ah, the medieval farmer, the lifeblood of the feudal economy and the backbone of the food chain. Mostly because they were always lying face down in a field, praying the crop didn't fail. You'd think farming meant peace and connection to nature. Maybe some chickens, a gentle breeze, a scenic sunrise. Wrong. You were basically locked in an endless mud wrestling match with the earth itself, and the earth was winning. You wake up before dawn because, of course you do. Your bed is a hay-filled sack that smells like wet wool and despair. Your pillow is your arm. Your blanket is a cloak that used to be your father's, and now contains more holes than fabric and at least one mouse. You wake to the sound of chickens screaming, pigs snorting, and someone outside vomiting because the ale was a little too enthusiastic last night. Your body already hurts, your knees stiff, your back bent like you slept in a barrel. But no time to complain, the Lord needs grain, your kids need bread, and your cow is giving you that look like it might finally explode from the inside out. Your clothes are the same thing you wore yesterday, the day before, and possibly since the last solar eclipse. One tunic, one belt, one pair of crusty boots that somehow double as sponges for manure and regret. You smell like a mixture of goat, old onions, and someone else's soap, because you haven't had your own in months. You start your day by checking the field. That's your field, except it's not. It belongs to the local noble because you're a serf, which is like a free person except for the part where you're not. You work the land but you don't own it. You grow food, but you don't keep most of it. You are, in legal terms, technically alive. You grab your tools, a wooden plough, a rusted sickle, and a hoe that's seen more action than the local tavern. You harness your ox, if you still have one. If you don't, congrats, you are now the ox. Time to plough your field by hand, dragging yourself through dirt that's either rock hard or soup, depending on the mood of the weather gods that week. The work is endless. Till, seed, water, pray. Pull weeds, shovel manure. Chase birds, chase your child who is chasing birds while holding a torch. Repeat. Every day. If it rains, your crops drown. If it doesn't rain, they shrivel. If it's just right, a storm will come anyway and ruin everything you love. Farming is like gambling, except instead of chips, you bet your survival. You eat gruel. That's your food. Gruel in the morning, gruel for lunch, and a celebratory chunk of turnip for dinner. If you're lucky, someone brought back a rabbit. If you're unlucky, the rabbit is still alive and extremely aggressive. Bread? Only if the harvest is good. Ale? Only when you've forgotten what joy tastes like. And hygiene? You don't have time for hygiene. Bathing happens maybe once a season. You wipe your hands on your tunic, your face on your sleeve, and your dignity on a nearby tree. Your hair is a nest. Your nails look like they were forged in the blacksmith's forge and filed with a hoe. Let's talk about family. You have a wife, kids, maybe too many, maybe not enough. Your kids help with the farm, even when they're barely old enough to walk. They feed the pigs, gather firewood, and occasionally fall into the well. Education? They learn to duck when the cow gets agitated. That's about it. And every year, like clockwork, the taxman arrives, with his ledger and his smug face. He doesn't care that your field flooded, or that bandits took your goats, or that your grain was eaten by a swarm of insects that arrived like a biblical curse with bad timing. He wants his share, and you give it. Because if you don't, you lose everything, or your kneecaps. During the winter, you huddle inside your hovel, wrapped in rags, eating roots and hoping your roof doesn't collapse under the weight of slightly disappointed snow. You entertain yourself by watching the fire and pretending it's not going out in 3 minutes because you ran out of dry wood 2 weeks ago. Social life? Occasionally there's a festival. You drink, you dance. You pretend you're not dying inside. Someone brings a pig, someone else breaks their leg. It's the highlight of your year. Emotionally, you're numb. You've seen too many bad harvests, too many sick animals, too many times where your best wasn't enough. You don't hope. You just keep moving, one foot in front of the other. You laugh sometimes, usually at things that shouldn't be funny, like the time your chicken pecked the tax collector. That was a good day, and yet somehow you keep going. You don't quit, you don't collapse, because people rely on you. You're feeding the village, keeping the Lord happy, making sure that something, anything, keeps growing. Now that's it for tonight. If you're not already asleep, try and close your eyes and drift off as you listen to this ambient fire. Good night, my friend.